Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to day two of CitSci India 2020 conference. We have another great day of talks and posters and a panel session coming up for you. But first, we have a really wonderful guest. I'm very pleased that I got the chance to introduce him. He's a very kind person that I've been able to interact with a few times through my work at NCBS. His name is Naveen Namboothri. He's the founder of Dakshin Foundation, and he's also the director right now. He's a marine biologist, and he's worked in a lot of different locations from coastal marine and island systems all over India. And he works at all different scales as well, everything from regional and national to very, very local agencies, and including both government and non-government sectors. So he's heading the Biodiversity and Resource Monitoring Program, and he oversees the establishment of several marine conservation projects, productions, field sites, including some community-led fisheries, and in Lakshadweep, citizen science programs in the Andamans, and the long-term monitoring of coral reef ecosystems in the Andamans as well. So he also helps build Dakshin's environmental education program and producing the publication of Treasured Islands, which is a fabulous, fabulous document if you haven't had a chance to read it. So he's served on the editorial board of Current Science as well, and was an invited member to the Aquaculture and Marine Biotechnology Task Force for the DBT India. Today, he's going to be examining the framework and the premises on which citizen science initiatives are built, and asking some really fundamental questions about what are the motivations, the expectations, and the rules of engagement of ongoing future citizen science efforts. It's wonderful that you've agreed to speak with us, Naveen. I can't think of a better person to give a keynote talk, and I'm very excited to hear from you. So take it away.
Thank you, Shannon, for those kind words. I think you've been more than kind. So yeah, to quickly give you some background as to what the organization is, where I come from, where I work, as well as the kind of initiatives that are that are relevant to the ongoing workshop on citizen science. I think what I thought I'd do is share a bit of personal experiences having engaged in multiple, I would say, participatory data gathering exercises. I, I think at the end of the talk, we can look at some of the semantics or the terminologies associated with some of these initiatives. But overall, this is just from personal experiences. And when Suhail got in touch with me asking if I could give a talk on citizen science based on my experiences, I was really, kind of thinking of which of these case studies should I talk about and what would be exciting to the crowd here. And then I thought, why not just pick, a few initiatives that are comparable to each other and have very different kind of engagements and initiative. I mean, very different kind of motives and and even the frameworks and the rules of engagement, and all of those are very different in some of these. I mean, in these three different case studies that I thought I would share. So Dakshin is an organization that works primarily with coastal and marine communities. When I say communities, both the biological communities as well as the people associated or dependent on those resources. And we primarily work with small-scale fisher communities in India, being the more marginalized community in the coastal India. And so as part of our engagement with communities in primarily in the two island systems, Andaman and Nicobar Islands and the Lakshadweep group of islands, and certain sites along the mainland coast of India, there have been some interesting engagements that I thought I should kind of discuss today and just give you a quick glimpse of what those engagements involve, but also towards the end try and unpack those a little bit more and understand, what drove some of those initiatives. So the first one on the left extreme is, I think there's sorry, I'm just going to pick the highlighter option here and Yes, so this one here is a short study that I did with one of the a couple of villages in along the coast of Tamil Nadu. The one in the middle is I work with the spoon line tuna fisheries in Lakshadweep, and the one on the right is a reef log, an initiative that involved people who are getting engaged with recreational diving to try and bring them on board towards collecting more information about the reef system. So those are the three case studies which I thought would be like, which actually quite contrasting in terms of what motivated those those initiatives, uh, their expected outcomes that one would expect out of some of those initiatives. So getting into some of those details, the one on the left, the work that involved so the one here which involved working with mapping of coastal sand dunes in a particular village called Panayur Periyakupam. And Panayur is two adjacent villages. There's a Periyakupam and Chinnakupam. This is a small village that's located on the so if one were to look here, that's Tamil Nadu. There's Kanchipuram district here. So these are two villages pretty much located centrally, north centrally along the Kanchipuram coastline. And this is on the highway from Chennai to Pondicherry, the East Coast Road. Uh, there's a big 4,000 megawatt power plant that was proposed to come up behind not close to the shore, but much further off. But the raw materials, that's the coal-based power plant, and the coal that was supposed to go as raw materials to the power plant was supposed to come and be landed here, just next to these two villages. And this meant that a lot of the coastal commons, were going to be diverted towards, large construction. There's a big shipping port, a mid-sized shipping port that was also proposed to be built there. And the EIA studies based on which, so there were lots of concerns of displacement of these villages, the potential impacts of having large quantities of coal being, stockpiled. These, the area between the villages, two villages was supposed to be used for stockpiling the coal, and there were concerns of, that affecting the local villages there. But as part of the public hearings and the EIA reports, it was categorically documented that there are no sand dunes. And the reason why that it specifies sand dunes is if there are sand dunes present in a certain area, they fall under CRZ1, the Coastal Regulation Zone 1 category, which gives them, which severely restricts the kind of developmental activities that one can do within that zone. So it fell within this. The EIA report said there are no sand dunes, and therefore, and many other similar assessments were made and went into it. But one of the biggest glaring errors there was this report that there are no sand dunes there, because just have to drive on the East Coast Road and you'll see towards the seaward side, you'll see really excellent sand dune systems, stretching all along the coastline. So, one of the NGOs who've been working actively with those village communities and multiple other village communities in that area got in touch with Dakshin and asked us if we could help them with with the sand dune part of it, also looking at the EIA critically as well. So I ended up visiting the village, and in a couple of hours, along with the local NGOs there, we ran a small training program just in 2 hours and it involved very simple basic profiling of the beach systems. And within 2 hours after the training, the villagers themselves went out there and covered 5 transects from this is where Periyakupam is and Chinnakupam is further north there. So between these two villages, they kind of split up and did 5 transects, and the line in blue indicates the site where the coal stockpiling yard was supposed to be built. So clearly, and then once they gave the data back to me and I helped them analyze it, and what one could see is there were clearly, big sand dune systems present there. Some of them, as most of them were wider than half a kilometer in height. They were more than 11, on an average more than 8 meters in height. In many places higher than 11 to 12 meters in many places. So it was quite evident that, and that those results kind of ended up in a small report that was used by the community in the court of law to kind of strengthen their hand and argue that there are sand dune ecosystems present in these areas, and that report significantly helped them contest the EIA based on which the clearances were provided, and you know and hold the agencies accountable a lot according to the rule of the land. That's just the and it was a very short initiative. I just spent a couple of days on the entire project probably another day or two on the report, the finalization of the report, but most of the data collection and all of that was done by the villages, and it was published as a co-authored paper along with the local village communities. So yes, so that was one of those case studies. And then coming to Lakshadweep Islands, which is a small archipelago, biogeographically a continuation of the Chagos Maldive Ridge that runs along the Indian Ocean, Arabian Sea. And Lakshadweep is interesting because it's a socioeconomically it's a very interesting system, because it's a 99%, probably 100% Islamic community, also very literate community, 99.9% literacy, and also, like I said, it's a very homogeneous community. And except for one particular island called Minicoy, most of the others are all culturally and ecologically and in many ways very homogeneous. So that's the kind of background to Lakshadweep. And one of their primary source of income is this pole and line tuna fishery, which relies on a particular species of fish, that tuna, that's called the skipjack tuna. It's a very resilient, high turnover species. So a good tuna species to kind of target, unlike say bluefin and yellowfin and other species of tuna which have much longer life histories and slower turnover rates as well. So they target skipjacks, and they don't harvest the entire schools, unlike certain fishing practices that involve long lines or purse seining and things like that, that tend to remove much larger quantities. This is one person with one pole and one line trying to, catching one fish at a time. So it's and it also diverts the fishing pressure off coral reef. So actually, group of islands are basically atolls, which are uplifted coral reefs on which they live. So the health of the coral reefs are very critical for the survival of those communities there. So in a way, because there's been this tuna fishing that's predominant fisheries there, there's not been too much of an interest to do reef fisheries. And it also supports, because it's very, because it's very labor intensive, there's a lot of livelihoods it generates by way of, employing people on boats. The best thing about it is there's literally no bycatch. So it doesn't catch any other species other than the skipjack tuna. Once in a while, probably you get juveniles of, yellowfin tunas or other pelagic species. And it has no impact on the habitat, unlike trawling and other practices. It doesn't really disturb physically cause any physically alter the habitats or disturb them in any manner. So it's one of the more sustainable practices of fishing in probably in the entire country. So yes, so that's what caught our interest in trying to engage with this fisheries here. And what we've also encountered while we were studying the fisheries is also that there are lots of challenges facing this fisheries as well. First is that there's no reliable data as to what is happening with the fish stocks. There are certain reports by agencies that kind of locate their kind of communicate that the availability of tuna and other pelagic fish resources are extremely high in these waters, and they're being, under harvested, which kind of is pushing, encouraging the government, the central government in particular, to expand the scale of operations of fisheries here. And as we've seen in many other places and everywhere else in the world, converting small scale fisheries into large scale fisheries is often not sustainable and kind of affects the sustainability of stocks over the long term. So we're trying to kind of uh, at least slow down or reverse these kind of large scale uh, scaling up efforts on these islands, and to try and keep them in the try and encourage the local fisher communities to consider sustainability of fish stocks over short-term benefits. And it's also going through multiple other transitions. I said the tuna has managed to keep the fishing pressure off the reefs, but more recently, work from done by other colleagues in CF Rohanathar and his team shows that the reef fishing is also slowly increasing because of certain trends with the pole and line fishing itself, right? The pole and line fisheries uses bait, which is live bait. So they basically take live fish from the reef and take it offshore and keep them alive in tanks and take them offshore and throw the live bait into the sea once they see a large pool of tuna, and that creates a feeding frenzy, and that's when they harvest the tuna. But the resource of live bait has become a significant significant choke point of sorts that's encouraging people to go down unsustainable pathways. So our objective has been to also try and work with the live bait resources on these islands. The other thing that we also kind of notice, this is not just in Lakshadweep, but generally overall, and not just with marine systems and fisheries, but overall with any natural systems and management of natural systems, there's a tendency to kind of leave out the primary stakeholders, which are the resource dependent communities, and in this case, the fisher communities of Lakshadweep. There's no conversation there's no platform as such to kind of have dialogue with fisher communities. And what we know from our own experiences is that they have excellent understanding of the local ecology. They make incredible observations while they're out there at sea. So from biological observations to abiotic ones as to, the conditions of the sea, they know exactly, what kind of weather patterns to expect based on the wind direction, the orientation of the sun. They know where to go and find tunas while, the tunas are running, migrating in large numbers. So, and including market dynamics as well. So there's incredible understanding within the fisher communities as to what is happening in their own backyards with marine systems. But unfortunately, there's no platform for integrating that knowledge into into good management practices, because that's very context specific, locally relevant information that's key to undertaking meaningful management practices. Unfortunately, that not even an attempt is being made to create that dialogue and create that integration. So that's something that we had in mind while embarking on a and also the other thing we see is that even scientists, there's a huge reliance on say a fisheries scientist to come there to Lakshadweep, who would probably make a visit for a short term and do a quick study and try and understand, to try and come up with management measures. And the conversation between scientists and managers on one hand is also not very transparent or happens at an equal footing. When it comes to the local community members, it's even more even more drastic and glaring, that tendency to leave them out. So what we wanted to do, and what this also means is that the kind of uh, power that is vested within the communities to manage their own resources is very little. So despite the communities being aware of the fact that fish stocks are probably getting affected, the bait fish populations have declined. All of this, there's really no way in which they can act on some of these issues. And because a lot of the management related powers are vested with the management agencies, and a lot of the information and the knowledge about these things are kind of that power is vested within the scientific community. So there's barely any decentralization of management efforts or knowledge generation efforts, which is also clearly like a big lost opportunity in terms of, you know, in terms of understanding systems better, acting better on with, some of the crises that we're dealing with. And the other key things that we also noticed is the inherent incompatibilities with these things. It's great to create these platforms, but even if you get a community member and a scientist and a manager to sit together in a room and have a conversation, it's incredible to note how everyone speaks a different kind of language. The scientists and the managers speak the language of science, which I mean, there are already barriers with, the vernacular languages and the ability to speak in English and all of that. But even if one were to overcome those, there's still a kind of an insurmountable barrier of, the language that science itself speaks. There's no way you can convert, say, a person's, knowledge, a local fisher, an experienced fisher's knowledge of, what's happening in say, for instance, they predict the movement of tuna that, okay, during this particular week, probably, so many distance kilometers away from the coast in the northeast direction is where one could expect tuna schools to be moving. That's entirely coming from experience and, understanding of those systems, which is more like a perceived kind of a knowledge. You can't convert or code that into data, and it often becomes very difficult to bring in those compatibilities. There are those systemic compatibilities. There's a good article that Karthik, my colleague Karthik and Meera have written on how this acts as a barrier, particularly with Lakshadweep context in mind. And there's also other prerequisites for engagement in many of these exercises, is that, for them to be active part of the system is that you need a certain level of literacy to be able to write down things in a numerical fashion, in a quantitative fashion that is acceptable to science, right? So that those are like a few serious compatibility issues that we kind of encountered while trying to embark on a journey. So we try to use monitoring as a bridge, right? So by engaging communities and practicing, some of these things, I mean, in data collection, is there a way to, kind of break those barriers that I was talking about earlier? And the whole idea was to decentralize and democratize knowledge generation, but also it was really a two-way process, and we did put in a lot of effort to ensure that it's a two-way process. And I'll come to that in detail a little later. So it started off through a co-created model of, the protocols that we implemented for monitoring the fisheries there was completely co-created. So we had, a lot of conversations and dialogues with fisher communities about what is it that they wanted to monitor and what is it that we felt is critical for them to understand trends. They're very aware of what happens based on their own engagement at their boat level, but interestingly, their understanding of what's happening at the larger island level or the entire archipelago level was not that solidly grounded. And they were quite interested in getting to understand those trends. Uh, we also had lots of conversations back and forth about the concept of catch per effort. So it's not enough if you just quantify catch, you need to know how much of effort went into catching X amount of fish. Is that changing, and how that's an indicator of, what's happening with your stock? So, some of those conversations went back and forth for a while, and I think it was close to an entire season it took just to put those protocols together. But what it meant was that there was a lot of buy-in from the communities because they were part of creating that protocol for data collection. there was a lot of buy-in from the communities, and they basically got the fundamentals of why we're doing it. And I also here need to reiterate that this is a very literate community, very comfortable talking about numbers, graphs, patterns, trends, and all of that. This may not probably work in every system where you may have to work with communities who may not be as literate as some of the Lakshadweep communities. That's the basic notebook that we had put together, the data collection sheets that we had put together. Uh, it it collected basic information on the amount of fish they caught, what fish they caught, what kind of bait they caught, where did they catch it, how much of time it took them to catch these resources. Uh, the communities wanted to monitor the effect of fish aggregation devices, which is promoted as a great way to augment the fish catch in the areas. The communities were split about whether the fish aggregation devices were good or bad. So they wanted to actually monitor what's happening at fish aggregation devices and elsewhere. So some of those things were also incorporated. They wanted to monitor fuel use, so we incorporated fuel use, which is also a good indicator of how much of effort is being invested into, into the fisheries as well. So we've run this program for 5 years now. This is a bit outdated, and it's been running on 4 islands. We've worked with close to uh, 45 to 50 boats over these years. Some have been part of the initiative throughout. Others have been part of it for a while, and then once the person who's in charge of monitoring that on a boat moves on to another boat, sometimes there is discontinuation and all of that that's happened. But we have managed to get more than 4,000 fishing trips have been recorded, and that's actually quite decent data sets from these 4 islands. And also to kind of touch upon the reasons why people felt a lot more motivated and engaged in the whole process is one, like I said, it was a co-created participatory model. Despite having no monetary incentive, a lot of the boats have continued engaging with the exercise for a fairly long time. And also the fact that when I mentioned about two-way exchange of this information, what we also do is we ensure when one fishing season is over and there's a break and we all come back, we collect all the data books from the boat owners and we bring it back, enter it all into Excel. There's a lot of back-end work. And then when the next season starts, we go out to each and every boat owner and the boat crew there and share a personalized information about what happened on their boat during that particular season, what happened at an island level, what happened at the entire archipelago level. So we do make sure that that information goes back to these people. So there's a lot of effort that goes into ensuring that. And what that does is it encourages a lot of conversations about what's happening with the fish stocks. It encourages a lot of conversations about managing these things better, about trends, about deciphering trends from some of the graphs that we share with them. So it's a good, engaging conversation, exciting conversation with these fisher folk. And also, these are just some examples of the data that has emerged out of our work. This is with bait fish utilization, clearly shows certain species of bait, which is the sprats, including the spawning sprat. So there's a particular targeted fisheries for the spawning ones as well in on certain islands. So this kind of gave us a good understanding of what's happening with the bait fish utilization on these islands. I mentioned that they wanted to monitor how the fish aggregation devices help their, does it actually augment the fish availability, or is it good or bad? So, what we found is that with the skipjack tuna, resources, for instance, there wasn't much of a difference between the fish caught at FADs, fish aggregation devices, and the ones that were caught in the open sea. But when it came to yellowfin tuna, there was a very stark difference in the size of fish that you get at, FADs as opposed to, what you get outside. So clearly, targeting yellowfin tuna in some of those sites was not like the most, good thing because you're basically targeting recruits that could potentially become much larger fish. Right. We also got some good insights into what's happening on different islands, in relation to the fish landing that's being done. So we did get a lot of different kinds of information out of this, and this is all being shared back with the communities and with the local fisheries department there. The only agreement we have with the fisher communities with regards to the use of the data is that they really don't want the data to be traced back to their particular boats. So that confidentiality is something that was part of the agreement with the communities. And we, in return, we'd ask them not to give us data that is not, incorrect data. So even if they didn't give us data, that was fine. But, that was the only kind of quid pro quo agreement that was there with when we started this. We were thinking about how to incentivize some of the participation. Some boats have been really excited and have been part of this journey throughout the last 4-5 years. And we also thought about how do we incentivize this. And so we put together every year we put together a calendar which showcases every month kind of showcases the boat that has or the boats that have participated very actively, and these calendars are circulated in the local languages, both Mahal and Malayalam, and circulated across the island. So it's a great way of it's a great way of incentivizing participation because people are very proud to see their boats and their names mentioned in big calendars which is circulated across the island. So that's something that we realized is much bigger incentivization than any other forms of incentivization. And the other great thing about the monitoring initiative that we've undertaken so far is that how that led to all those conversations about based on the data that they themselves have collected has now led to us being able to initiate a kind of a co-management platform there. So co-management is nothing but basically the local communities and the managers coming together collectively managing the resources. So there are certain agencies and advantages that the communities have over the managers, and there are certain strengths that the management authorities bring to the table. So having a co-management initiative is like a great way of addressing some of those concerns. And the Lakshadweep Fisheries Department has been quite supportive on that front. And as part of our conversations and dialogues with the fisher communities, it's exciting to note that they themselves have come up and recommended ban of certain kinds of practices that they feel is like the core of many of the problems that is leading to unsustainability. One is night fishing for bait, because bait has been one of those biggest, deal breakers of sorts to continuing the pearl and line tuna fisheries. So what they themselves have asked for a banning of night fishing. They've asked for banning small meshes, not an immediate ban, but a slow phasing out of the small meshed nets that they used to catch some of these baits from the reefs, and also ban all kinds of tuna waste that is being dumped into the lagoons and to the adjacent sea. So these are all initiatives entirely that the communities wanted to regulate, and through this co-management platform, they wanted the fisheries department to also give them some agency to implement and regulate and monitor these bans. So that's the Lakshadweep background, and that's what we've managed to do in Lakshadweep over these years. And coming to the Andamans, we initiated a program called the Reef Log, and the idea behind it was that that there's a growing dive industry in the islands, and there are lots of youngsters who are part of this industry who are really keen about who are in the sector because of their passion for the ocean, and also a lot of recreational diving happens in these islands, and a lot of the people who are once into diving as a hobby or as a passion, they really get involved with the marine systems, and we wanted to garner the large growing dive based industry and to use some of the recreational dive industry to collect information on reef health. We started this off at an experimental level in the Andamans. Now there are conversations to kind of scale it up to a much larger spatial scale, and make it a more, kind of a formalized process as well. So what is reef log? It's basically a very simple, set of slates and a bunch of additional guides that help you use the slates and the reef log platform. It's we basically have identified a bunch of, so there's a fish slate and an invertebrate slate, and all people have to do is, and the reason and the way the species have been selected for monitoring is based on their functional roles, and these are like key species, and they need to be easily identifiable, can't be complicated species that are very difficult to identify. So we picked some of the species that have key functional roles on reef ecosystems, and their presence and absence are great indicators of what's happening with reef ecosystems. Similarly with the invertebrates as well. So we picked a bunch of these key indicators, and as part of the slate, you just have to match what you're looking at with what's there on the slate, and as soon as you see one of those, you just have to record a tally mark in your, as you can see here, you record a tally mark, and and basically then come back and collate that information or share it back with the dive shop, right? And there's a bunch of other information, abiotic and environmental parameters that is also measured as part of it. Certain special events like large spawning aggregations or large schools of certain fish species in certain areas, or urchin outbreaks, jellyfish outbreaks. Some of those special events also, there are spaces for monitoring those as well. And then there is, so that's what the entire reef log program is about. And we have partnered with multiple dive shops in the past, but we really want to kind of be in conversation with certain larger dive operators in India to try and make this a more part of a formal part of of operations that they conduct in India. So hopefully that gets helps us scale up the operations and make it like a much more organized initiative. So if one were to kind of put together all these three initiatives, started thinking, or I mean, in retrospect, now started thinking while working on this presentation, I was thinking, what are those things that are similar and dissimilar about these three initiatives? They're all participatory exercises. Citizens or communities have been part of the, generating knowledge in a certain way, in a certain scientific manner. And, but then they all come from very different places. And and the objectives of it are very different. The motivations behind it are very different. So if you look at the Panayur example, for instance, the one in Tamil Nadu, Kanchipuram district, that was a response to an immediate concern that the communities were facing. They had a serious concern of displacement, of having large, coal stockpiles and coal stocking yards and all of that, pollution, all other kinds of health concerns. So on multiple levels, there was like real and very urgent requirements of the community that kind of triggered that, and it was a very short-term initiative. Over a couple of days, the communities monitored those 5 transects, and then it was taken to the court of law and submitted as an evidence that against the EIA that was published, that there are those that, and to contest that EIA statement. And on the other hand, the motivation for Lakshadweep seemed to be to understand the what's happening with the fish stocks, what is are the stocks actually going down. There were conversations with the management and the communities about they had differences as to what was happening with the trends in fisheries and all of that. So that kind of motivated us to give the communities more enterprise and agency to be more involved in resource management. The Reef Log initiative was entirely came from a different mind space altogether. That came from, hey, here are a bunch of people diving. Why don't we, get them to contribute to data collection? So that was like our interest, and we kind of talked to dive operators, and everyone felt, okay, let's go ahead and do this. Uh, Also thinking about who is this initiative for. So with the Panayur example, there's not much for me in terms of, academically, it's not like a significant, piece of information, or it's not like a big data set that's of real value. But what it did help is, so it's something that the communities worked on, and it's pretty much their data set. And in Lakshadweep, it was entirely the fisher communities and their interest in monitoring the resources there, their own fisheries there. And for the Reef Log initiative, who are those participants there? It's something that Dakshin created, and whom we are looking at as potential participants are urban educated communities who can afford to come and do recreational scuba diving, which is not something that every you know every everyone here in India can do. I mean, it's something that's more expensive and requires a lot more resource investment and stuff like that. So yeah, those are the kind of so that's about who are those people who have conceived those initiatives, and who are also participating in those initiatives, and who created it. So here it's Dakshin who came up with the protocol for the Panayur lot, and and this was a established, a very simple, low cost, low tech protocol that I just passed on the technique to the communities there, and they just went ahead and generated data. In Lakshadweep, it was a completely co-created protocol. So there was a lot of back and forth about what needs to be monitored, what is important for them, what is important for managers. All of those conversations happened. With Reef Log, again, it's something that we've come up with. We designed all of this. There were some conversations with, experienced divers, but more or less it was an initiative that came from us. And like I said, the participants are, urban, uh, upper middle class to rich, rich people. And who is this meant for, right? I think those are all critical questions that one needs to ask before, designing a citizen science initiative. And what we've seen is that, I mean, with our work, who is this for? This is for the Panayur work. It's clearly for those people who are there, and it has, it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't have much benefit for me as an in terms of academic value, or in terms of larger data sets and things. So it's not like the most robust data set. It's just a one-time information from 5 transects. In the Lakshadweep case, it directly benefits the communities. It's very tightly linked to their own livelihood. So there is an interest in, it's for the fisher communities there and for managers as well there. The Reef Log initiative is pretty much something that the marine biologists are very excited about, and the reef managers there, the forest departments, and whoever else is involved in reef management. It's something that's useful for them, but the participants themselves are not directly benefiting from that. And also to kind of quickly look at what is those motivations for the Panayur community. Clearly, it's the direct, tangible benefits of using this as a tool, using the data that's collected from here as a tool to, contest in court. For the Lakshadweep fishers, it's a broader understanding of what's happening with, the trends, their own, photographs and things like that coming in calendars. Those are pretty much the kind of things that are motivating them. And for the participants in the Reef Log initiative, it's very much an altruistic kind of a thing, a feel-good factor of sorts. Is that, hey, this is like me doing my 2 bits to this reef ecosystem, and it's like a very far off, intangible kind of a motivation for those folks. And also, if one were to think of, and also in terms of data rights, in our it's not the same throughout all these 3 different initiatives, as you can see there. But what's also critical to notice is what's the stake involved for the participants. For the participants, the stakes are really high in the Panayur example. Lakshadweep example, it's like a medium-term stake that, or rather like a long-term stake for them. And it's not like if they don't participate, it's not like they're going to suffer significantly. So there's, the stakes are like somewhere in between. But for the Reef Log initiative, the stakes for the participants are really low. It doesn't really matter if they participate in this or not, right? It's not going to
Naveen,
directly affect them. Yes, that's the last
I'm
slide.
sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, just because our session's supposed to end in about 5 minutes, so I just want to be able to ask you a couple of questions to you. So
Sure. So that's pretty much it. So, I also thought I'll wrap up with trying to ask these questions about what are the differences between all these different kinds of initiatives? What are we trying to achieve out of it? What's the motivation? Are we defining who those citizens are in citizen science? You know, some of those things that you found in the table as, are critical to kind of understanding and designing your own citizen science initiative, because there's a lot more initiatives coming up. So it's good to give some thoughts about what drives those motivations, and what are some of those rules of engagement that, or the transactions that you're making with the participants as well as the people who are initiating the effort. Yes, so this is a lot of the work that I presented is not just my work. There's folks from the Lakshadweep team. Mahima has been involved in both the Reef Log and the Lakshadweep community effort as well. So yeah, I'm happy to take questions, and sorry for taking up more time.
you absolutely don't need to apologize. It was a fantastic talk. I really enjoyed it. Yeah, and also especially because you talked about so many different types of initiatives, which I think is both really informative, as well as shows really the diversity of experiences that you have working with different types of audiences, but also with different types of questions. I'm actually going to exercise my right as moderator and ask you the first question. So a lot of your talk, you were talking with stakeholders that have very vested interest. Fishermen, for example, in the oceans. But I think in our landlocked Bangalore, and also since one of the things you've actually taught me is the importance of conveying the oceans, our need for oceans, no matter where we are. So do you have any tips or suggestions how we can actually bring people from maybe non-coastal regions, kind of bring them better into a participation in our ocean work, or our understanding? Could they do something online or something like that? I'm just wondering how to involve them.
Oh, that's a very good question, and quite tricky question as well. So, it's way more easier to leverage participation when there's clear, tangible benefits, right? And like I said, most participants in other initiatives are people from Bangalore, for instance. A lot of them come to Andamans and dive, right? And many of them youngsters, and they all go back very excited about marine ecosystems. But that system is only accessible to a certain socioeconomic group, right? So I think first we need to try and make sure that access to systems are way more, cheaper, affordable, and also try and communicate. As much as we talk about the importance of forest, oceans are always like a secondary far of things which are not really really present there in your in your horizon of information or things that you talk about, right? So I think that way, in many public discourses of any environmental issue, you need to have coasts and oceans embedded, and not as an afterthought that, okay, we do have to do something for our ocean, so let's just plug in one component, but rather make it integral, because it is integrated. It's not like the forests are completely dissociated from what happens in the ocean. So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, Shannon, but direct participation, it's really tricky to see how we can get that to
Correct.
happen, because it probably requires more access, right? The more things we have access to, the more we engage with those. If it's remote and far away, it requires a lot more effort, and if engagements are also going to be very remote and one-off engagement. Yeah.
So I agree, and thanks for that. So you have quite a few questions on Slack, and Naveen has promised me that he will go on to Slack afterwards. So in case we don't get to your question because the session's running out of time, he has said he will go on and chat with you, and he's been on the platform, so he should be able to do this. So I'll try to ask a couple of questions, though. We have some really nice questions. One question is about how you can use scientific technology to build understanding of the environment with community, teaching them how to use technologies.
So, yeah, I think it's scientific technology, especially technology, is very quite powerful tools. It addresses scale, it addresses multiple factors. But I think while using technology, because for us in the core of our philosophies is inclusiveness and trying to make sure that the most deserving of the lot are part of the larger conversation. So for instance, if it's a climate change debate, we'd really like the people who are in the front line, who depend on natural resources, experience these things on a day-to-day basis, to be part of conversations and things like that. The only only thing to bear in mind while using technologies is technologies themselves can exacerbate those barriers. So and telephone is one of those technologies which kind of has percolated across socioeconomic groups. So I wouldn't hesitate from using phone-based kind of technologies to reach out to multiple communities. So I do think technology is useful, but the short answer is you need to be wary of some of those aspects. That technology itself shouldn't create those exacerbate those existing inequalities in communities, because that means even in education and all of that, we see that right now the people who are really getting affected are those who don't have access to good connectivity and don't have access to good smartphones. In the Andamans, a lot of our own field staff are asking us, we're putting together small funds to kind of buy them tabs and smartphones so that their kids can learn. So it's great when you scale it up, and we as urban people, because we have access to all of these, we don't think about what's happening outside our vision. But technology can also become can be very divisive and selective. Just need to be
Right.
wary of that. Yeah.
Right. So another question that there's actually several, but there's one in particular that I really want to get to from Madhu, and was asking, when must the scientists lead the citizen science initiative, and when must they support or enable the initiative, and how do you grapple with the trade-offs between them? I think it's a very philosophical question, but I'd be really interested to hear your viewpoint.
Yeah, that's a very philosophical question. I think it begins from where. So, what drives you to start a citizen science initiative, right? You're doing a season watch. It's to try and understand what's happening with the phenology of trees, and with other initiatives, it might be with amphibians. It depends on what is it that you're setting up an initiative for, and I think that determines your level of engagement. So I couldn't have gone to Panayur, for instance, and spent a lot of time conveying to them the value of using simple, low-cost, low-tech protocols, and the citizen science. They're struggling with a court case and deadlines and stuff like that. So that's like a very specific need for a community. I think it depends on who you're dealing with, what issues, and what is your initiative trying to address. It's a large broad thing which over a lot, but it always helps to have consultations and engagements with the primary, and also think of who the beneficiaries are, right? In a lot of initiatives, especially conservation initiatives, it's very clearly the scientists or the practitioners of science or the managers who have a certain interest in it are setting up these initiatives. And people who participate assume that they're doing their two bits towards you know sustainability and the larger environmental issues that's happening. So one needs to be wary of, are you letting them off their guilt and hook by just contributing a few data sets, and them going back feeling, hey, I've done my two bits to the planet? Or can we continuously engage and And I think two-way communication is really critical for any citizen science initiative. Or you just have passive contributors, which is just like any field staff that, I mean, I wouldn't say field staff also are excellent. I mean, most field staff I've worked with are great in terms of their knowledge, but just like data collectors, right? It's like crowdsourcing of data. So I would say really requires more engagement and understanding of motivations and stuff like that. Thanks for that.
Yeah, all right. Thank you so much, Naveen. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but there's a lot of really wonderful questions, very juicy questions that I hope you can get to on Slack. And please ask Naveen some more questions if you get to them, and he'll try to answer as many as he can. So we'll be just starting our next session in a couple of minutes. So I'll say goodbye and thank you, Naveen. It was awesome. You were a perfect person for this conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And kind words, Shannon. And yeah, I also wanted to thank all the organizers, from you, Suhail, all of you, the entire team has been working quite cohesively. So very happy to, and thanks for inviting me here. I think that's very glad to talk about some of these work, which you barely get opportunities to talk about these kind of issues.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks, Naveen. Bye, everyone.